everyone to our first sleep-focused Clubfoot webinar. I'm excited to host both Denise and Bonnie as we talk all about Clubfoot and sleep. If you are involved with Clubfoot treatment in any capacity, whether that be a parent, caregiver, clinician, you know that sleeping in the boots and bar is the linchpin for successful maintenance of the initial correction. But sleeping in infancy can be tricky without the addition of a medical device. And in this webinar, we aim to help normalize your parental experience, give tips and tricks for different aspects of sleep, and talk about what's normal sleep development in all children, boots and bar or no boots and bar. Our goal is for this to be a resource for you on your child's Clubfoot treatment journey. So let's start with intros. Bonnie, why don't you introduce yourself and just give us a little background about you?
Hello, yes, thank you very much. My name is Bonnie. I'm a sleep consultant based in the UK. And what gives me, that slight edge is that I also have a child with clubfoot. So I have been there when it comes to sleep, and I have been there when it comes to putting on those boots and bars every single night until he was 5 years old. So I have that extra experience on my side. And I am here primarily to help families get better sleep. And I am so passionate about sleep because I believe that it is an absolute skill, just like riding a bike, just like swimming in a swimming pool. Sleep is a skill, and some babies get it immediately, very quickly, and all by themselves, very clever, and others don't. And it's that when it gets to that point where the situation is becoming, unmaintainable, basically, that's where I step in. That's where I help families to find a solution. And often it is, a baby with the clubfoot and with boots and bars on, and it is about helping them and that individual family to find solutions to better sleep. So that's why I'm here, and I am very, very passionate about it. And hopefully I can offer some advice, given that I have had that, experience with a child with clubfoot.
Amazing. We're so happy to have you here. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
being here.
Thank you.
All right, Denise, why don't you give us a little background?
So my name is Denise Watson Tan, and I'm a physiotherapist who's worked with Clubfoot for many years, and lead a team in London that deals with children with Clubfoot. So very passionate about getting Clubfoot corrected and corrected well. And as you so rightly said, Maureen and Bonnie, sleeping and using the boots and bar overnight with a child getting good sleep is really, really important. And we want to maintain the great correction that we can get. And a child needs to sleep and keep the boots and bars on until they're 5 years of age. It's a big ask for families. So it's really great to have a webinar today talking about some of the sleep issues, because it's something we spend a lot of time with in our clinic. We try to be very holistic with the children and their families, and really support them, because it's a big ask to wear bracing for 5 years at night time.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here too, Denise. I'm so excited just for this, because I know as a clubfoot parent myself, is like the sleep is one of the top issues that people really are struggling with. That can be a challenge. Either, like you said, Bonnie, I love that, of like either some babies get it and some babies don't. And then how do you kind of navigate that? So that's where I hope this webinar can be of use to clubfoot parents, because then they can kind of log on and hear different tips and tricks and get advice. So, but let's just begin like with the basics, Denise. Why does my child need to wear the boots and bar at night?
So once you've achieved correction, you've got to maintain that correction. It's a little bit like when you have your teeth straightened, you have to wear a retainer afterwards once you've got the straight teeth, because otherwise the body has this memory and it tends to go back into the old place. So bones grow back into the old position, muscles like to go back into their first position. The body wants to revert back. And so we've got to find some way of maintaining that new corrected position. And in young children, there's been some nice research looking at the way in which the cartilaginous part of the bone, so the soft, watery cartilage, reforms as the foot is corrected. And so you need to hold the foot in a good position for that the soft, watery malleable part of the bone to sort of remodel in its new position. So that's one of the reasons. We also know that in clubfoot, the calf muscle is relatively short and quite tight. So you need to maintain a stretch on that muscle. Otherwise, it's going to always want to go back into the shorter position. And you're stretching the soft tissues, you're holding the bones in place, and you're doing it at a time when the child is not really, it's not going to affect the child's motor development because they're asleep. It's at a good time and you're getting a nice long period of stretch. So that overnight bracing is absolutely vital. So initially you do the 12 weeks of 23 hours, don't you? You need that to sort of get the baby used to the boots and bar and get the remodeling happening really in those early stages. But then that night time is a time when you've got 12 hours, hopefully, of uninterrupted stretch and positioning, which you don't want to do that during the day, because in the daytime you want the child to run around and crawl around and roll and pull to stand and achieve their motor milestones. So that's why it's important to do it at night time, so that it's not affecting their development.
Yeah, I think I remember as a parent reading something about the fact that that's when they're non-active. So that's the most likely that the child's feet will kind of start that regression is in non-active times. And that actually helped me kind of frame, okay, this is why sleeping is more important than like wearing a daytime AFO or something else, is that it really is about that nighttime non-activity. Is that right?
Well, and physiologically, we grow more when we're asleep. So get us the most intense release of growth hormone just as you're going in shortly after you've gone into deep sleep. So you're also getting that sort of, you're also harnessing that maximum growth time. And if you think about the other thing is, if you think about the position children tend to sleep in, they tend to point the feet down or in, or they're in all sorts of different positions. So this is just maintaining that good position. So they're not permanently pushing the feet. They're not having 10 hours with their feet pointing down.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. Thanks, Denise. I think the next thing we're going to kind of talk about is the emotional side of having a child with clubfoot and the sleep and how that impacts sleep. So I know that one of the biggest mental hurdles for me when I had heard that my daughter was going to be born with clubfoot was the idea of sleeping, right? Like it's hard enough to get your child to sleep. I have two older typical girls who don't have clubfoot, and their sleep was not any way, shape, or form like ideal, right? So the idea of having to throw in an extra component, I think it's important to normalize for parents that there is an emotional piece to it, right? Because you're the one responsible for putting on the boots and bar. So there was this really complex dynamic that I felt where I knew I was doing the best thing for my child, right? Putting her in the boots and bar, that was like a no-brainer. But that didn't always mean that it felt good, like logically versus emotionally. And so then putting the boots and bar on her at night and knowing if that was causing any sort of issue with her sleep, then I felt responsible for doing that because I'm the one putting on the brace, even though I know that's what's treatment protocol, right? But one can't feel that without the other. And so I think I felt a lot more like responsibility to respond to every single cry, right? Try to soothe in whatever capacity I could, which sometimes meant we were getting up 14, 15 times a night just to respond to every single cry because we were like, there was a guilt factor, if I'm being honest about how that felt of just like, I really wanted to do everything possible to make her as comfortable as possible. While doing that, it also set up bad sleep habits for us, right? It set up different, we had the whole routine for the boots and bar, and that was a great routine. But then once we actually timed to go to sleep, she couldn't figure out how to sleep without being assisted with us without that routine. And I think a lot of that had to do with my own emotional processing through the clubfoot, her diagnosis, but also through the actual treatment. And I think it's important for parents to feel that, like to understand that there is that component of it. And your baby also might not just be the boots and bar, it can also be that they're responding to your emotional process and what you're feeling, and they're feeding off of that. We all know how intuitive babies are and how connected they are, especially to their moms. And so if you have a lot of anxiety and feelings about the boots and bar, that can translate into how your child is adjusting to it as well. What do you think, Bonnie?
I definitely agree, actually. I definitely agree that I think, you know, even working with families who don't have a child necessarily in with Clubfoot or wearing boots and bars, you know, you find there is that you're trying to teach the child a skill where they're going to have some big feelings, and it is hard for parents to do that sometimes when all you are programmed to do is to help them, to help soothe them, to help them to go to sleep because you desperately want them to sleep. And that's where, you know, you do start to introduce these props where you are helping that child to fall asleep, and that is where often the problems arise, because, you know, they are waking up at any point during that night, could be half an hour after they've gone to sleep, and you are no longer there doing what you did, okay, or doing what you were doing when they went to sleep. And that is exactly why they find it very hard to connect their sleep cycles throughout the night. And that really has nothing to do with the boots and bars at all. It is to do with the props. It is very much an emotional thing, yes, when you know you've put your child in boots and bars and you really want them to go to sleep really nicely and you feel very sorry for them. But at the end of the day, it's about training them to sleep as well as, you know, putting those boots and bars on and getting that done. And, you know, hopefully over time, at first, yes, you feel very, there's a lot of anxiety around it and you're not sure if you've done it right and have you done it too tight and how they're going to sleep, and you do feel that anxiety, but hopefully very quickly you'll start to get used to that process, and therefore you can then try and prevent or stop yourself from introducing those props that will ultimately, you know, hinder them from connecting their sleep cycles throughout the night, which is where, you know, I sort of work with families, and that's what I tend to work on with them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that I liked what you said in the beginning about it being a skill. I honestly have never thought about it that way, but I think if parents are able to think about that, like if we're all trying as parents to help our kids have the skills to feel like confident, successful adults, right? So if sleep is a portion of that, then if you think about it in that way, I think it can help change the narrative for what parents are feeling and what they're trying to accomplish, right? I think it can be very complicated and overwhelming as having an infant as it is, because you're trying to navigate everybody's different advice. That's not just about sleep, that's about everything, right? There's all these different opinions out there about everything, and you're trying to navigate what's right for you and what needs to happen for your child. And I think that can get really complicated. And it's I really like that idea of like it's a skill and we need to help them develop that skill and not put hindrance in the way, like you said, like the props, that sort of thing. Because I know, like, I'll be the first one to be like, I'm so guilty of that. I was extremely guilty of it with all three of my girls, but especially with my Clubfoot cutie, just because there was that added layer of me feeling like I wanted to do everything possible to soothe her, when in reality, what I was doing was preventing her from gaining the skills she needed to get the sleep that was necessary.
And
And I
I
think
do say to, yeah, I
yeah.
do say to parents, I say, you know, it's like, it's tough being a parent, you know, especially when you've got that, you know, that is a bump in the road. That is something that's happening to your child, which is really tough. And it is a big thought as well to think I've got to do this for the next 5 years. And how are we going to manage it when we go on holiday? And how are we going to manage it when we're driving in the car and on our way home from somewhere? Or, you know, and, you know, it's a big ask, but, you know, at the end of the day, you've got to sort of just get on with that aspect of it, and then think, how am I going to deal with the sleep here, and how am I going to make sure I give them the best opportunity to sleep? Because if they can get into that deep restorative sleep, it's going to be so much better for them as well in terms of their development. You know, linking into that, you know, the process of the boots and bars and what it's doing for them at night time. Having that deep sleep is so important.
And they need about 1 to 2 year olds. The average is they need about 11 to 14 hours sleep a day. And one of the other facts I found out is that 60% of 4 year olds still have regular naps. So, you know, kids do need a lot of sleep. And then a few other little statistics is that I found that at 12 months, so 27% of children at 12 months don't sleep for 6 hours at a go. So that you know, that means they are waking up fairly frequently, and 43% don't sleep for more than 8 hours at a go. So, you know, there's significant waking within that 10 to 12 hours overnight, isn't there, then?
Yeah, and waking is really normal. So waking is absolutely normal. We wake during the night. We wake, we don't realize we wake. We might turn over in our beds, we'll go back to sleep. And this is where, you know, if you've woken up and you haven't got the same environment as you had when you went to sleep, then as a baby or a small young child, you're going to then call out. And the only way you know is to cry, is to get upset. And immediately a parent would think, oh my goodness, it must be the boots and bars. It must be. They must be in pain. They must have hurt themselves. They must have clonked themselves on the head. You know, you can give yourselves all of these reasons as to why they've woken up, when actually, most likely, if they're a very healthy child, then actually what's happening is they just can't put themselves back to sleep, and they want to sleep as much as you want them to sleep, is another thing that I always say to parents, because actually they don't want to wake up, and they want to go back to sleep quickly, they just don't know how to do it by themselves.
And that's quite a distressing cry, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, as a professional, I know that this is so important to have you two talking about this, because as a professional, I know that what we can look at is, are we giving them the right boots? Are we making sure the boots are as comfortable as possible? You know, are we setting them up and making sure that side of things is as good as possible? But when it comes to the actual getting the sleep, it's such a big stress on parents, isn't it, to know what to do. And particularly, I think if it's the first child and you just don't know anything different, you know, maybe it's worse with the first because you really think that it must be worse than other children are getting in terms of sleep. But I think if you have several children, you sort of realize they don't all sleep well. I suppose but it depends whether your number one slept well. So I had a number one that didn't sleep and a number two that did sleep. So I think if I'd had, you know, it would have been easier for me if I'd had a clubfoot baby second, because I'd known that children don't always sleep. But it's a big guilt. I agree with you, Bonnie. I think this whole guilt about your child having to go through that, a lot of parents feel responsible they shouldn't do, because we don't really know enough about the inheritance of clubfoot to even know how some people have it.
And I think that's such an important part of just normalizing normal sleep development, right? I think it's really easy for clubfoot parents to feel like the boots and bar becomes the catch-all for any sort of issue, any wake up, any sort of disturbance in the night. You know, you're like, oh, is the boots and bar causing this? And I think especially if you have a first child and you don't have that experience of having kind of that normative sleep waking up cycle and have gone through that infancy development, that can even be stronger to being like, I don't know. We're all kind of guessing. I know for me, I was like, I was always guessing, like, what's happening? Is this, no one's giving us exact answers. And so it's easy to go, well, the boots and bar is causing discomfort. So if I remove that from the situation, she's going to sleep better. But the reality is that's not the case in majority of the cases, right? Like you said, Denise, if it's a good fitting boot, if you're not struggling with skin issues, if you have a good correction, if all of that, it's not going to be related to that. Do you agree, Bonnie?
I 100% agree. Yeah, definitely. If you've got, you know, the right socks, you've done the right, you know which notch that they go on. I would say my son was actually perfectly happy in the boots and bars. I really don't think he felt in any way that he didn't mind putting them on. He loved putting the socks on. I mean, he put the boots and bars on every night. It was part of our routine. And I really don't feel, for my son in particular, that he was in any sort of distress with them on at all. And he still sleeps now, and he's 11 with his knees up in the air. Sometimes you walk in, his knees are in the air, but he obviously doesn't have them on now. But he had some very strange sleeping positions, and I think that's something that you have to get used to, and I don't think you should worry about them. I did used to sometimes put some toweling around the cot because I didn't like the sound of the boots clonking against the side and things like that, because again, that can give you anxiety, and it can make you think, have they hurt themselves? What was that noise? And you can be running in there again to check on them. But actually, if you can get yourself to that point where you feel comfortable with what you're doing and how that child is feeling and you're happy with it, then it is more about focusing on how to get that child sleeping better, connecting their sleep cycles without you there as a prop. And it may be that you are rocking them to sleep, it may be you're feeding them to sleep, you might be sitting next to them, stroking their head. These are all wonderful things that you think you're doing brilliantly as a parent, but actually they are props that are perhaps helping your child fall asleep for that first sleep cycle. And after that, they can wake up and be completely confused and scared and, scream out in, tiredness as well as everything else, and trying desperately to tell you they want to go back to sleep, but actually they can't because they don't know how to do it. And it has nothing to do with the boots and bars.
Mm-hmm.
So that good routine at night time, I know from talking to Bonnie was good at having that routine at night time. You were good at having that routine at night time. And how important do you think it is to have a good nighttime routine, Bonnie, with any child, especially a child with clubfoot?
Yes, absolutely. It's one of my number one things. I always go back to what do you do about an hour before bed? What do you do in your bedtime routine? Does it involve screen time? Does it involve milk? Does it involve running around after a bath, playing chase with a sibling? Does it involve a story? All of these questions. And I do believe that a very boring bedtime routine is very, very good. It needs to be something that you can take away with you, you can take to nanas, you can take away on holiday with you, something really simple, really boring. I normally involve a bath because it's one of the only activities we generally do in the day, which is another signal for sleep. And we do it at the end of the day, which tells the child that actually this is the bedtime routine, this is what we do at night. And just having a few things done in the same order every night doesn't have to be complicated, and giving that child perhaps some choices throughout as they get older. So which out of these 2 pairs of pajamas do you want to wear? And actually they're not really having any choice because you're offering them 2 pairs of pajamas. Things like that in that bedtime routine, keeping it really simple. I would say it shouldn't last longer than 30 minutes. And then obviously the boots and bars become part of that. We used to do it just before the story. I put them on and then we had a story cuddling together. And then it was, I always use sort of a key phrase, and it's time for sleep, and then pop them into the cot. And that's really your job done then. That's where you should feel, right, goodness, we're going to have a rest now. And we've done everything we can, and we've had a lovely bedtime routine. And now it's time for sleep.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I like that. A boring sleep routine is a good sleep routine. Like like what it's saying is like what I'm hearing you say is it doesn't have to be complicated. And that's the part where it can feel so overwhelming for parents to even put the boots and bar on, especially when they're in that first transition phase, 23 hours, and you're learning how to put the boots on, and that's complicated enough. And so to make the routine something that's simpler and consistent, but is very like indicative of it. I know that's one of my key things that I tell parents is like to create a consistent routine that included boots and bar. It set us up for that long-term success. So when she was 3, she was like, I need my boots and bar. Like that was part of a sleep cue for her. Is like whenever she slept, she had that on. And so it became almost like a sleep cue in a way that when she graduated from wearing them, there was an adjustment period of like, oh, I don't have that anymore. So what do I do instead? So we did very similar, just very same thing every single night. It was the same, other than we switched which parent was in charge, because I didn't want her to get used to one parent always doing it. I wanted us both to be proficient at it, and to have, and her not get to dictate who was in charge, because there will be nights where dad isn't here or I'm not here. So that was another thing that I always tell parents do, is like switch up who's doing the routine so that you both feel confident doing it, because it is, like you said, Bonnie and Denise, it's a 5-year commitment. So in those 5 years, you are going to have changes in your routine, in your schedule. So how are you able to adjust and adapt to those in that environment?
So it becomes bath, boots, bottle, book, boredom, bed.
Lovely.
But I mean, the other thing, you know, as you say, Maureen, is changing, because the thing is, children do change, and even a child that sleeps well when they're a small baby might have a time when they sleep less well. And I guess it'd be interesting to see what Bonnie's sort of suggestions are there. But certainly at 18 months, it's really common to have a bit of sleep regression at 18 months, just because life is changing at such a pace for all children at that stage. So is that true, Bonnie, that you might have a baby that sleeps well, but they hit 18 months and then life is a bit exciting for sleep?
Yeah, I mean, that can happen at any time. It can happen when they start crawling. It can happen when they start moving, when they start walking. At any point, there can be sleep regressions. But I try to always say to parents, let's not get too hung up on these sleep regressions. You can read so much about them and get yourself so worked up about sleep regressions, when actually we're probably talking about a 2-week period where actually there's a little bit of upset. They're doing something different to what they normally did, or perhaps something you're doing isn't working so well. But really, if you then start to change things up, and perhaps you start sitting with them, or perhaps you start bringing them into your bed, types of things to try and stop whatever's happening, and you need your sleep because you're quite used to it because you had a really good sleeper before, then that's when you start to see that sleep progression. The time of disruption is actually growing, because you starting to introduce those props into something that actually wasn't there before. So yeah, it can help. I would say, just coming back to that bedtime routine, actually, that what I found one of my top tips would be get your child to bed earlier, because if you find that you are lots of children going to bed much too late, and when your child goes to bed too late, they come out the bath and they start crying, and then they're like, you think, oh, they just love the bath so much. No, it's because they're completely overtired now. And then if you try and put the boots and bars on when they're overtired and they start crying, it will upset you more as a parent, it will upset them more as a child. They're not crying at all about probably putting the boots and bars on, they're just crying because they're really overtired. So I would say, just on that bedtime routine, making sure that you're doing it early enough is really, really important to stop that, any extra anxiety coming in from a parental point of view, really, when you put those boots and bars on.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more, because that was something we employed with all 3 of our girls, like, to the point where socially people were like, I can't believe your kids go to bed at 6 p.m. And I'm like, well, they're tired and I'm avoiding that overtired. Like, I'm trying to put them to sleep before they have that meltdown so that they get into that routine. And I think that did really benefit us. One of the things that benefited with our Clubfoot treatment too, is that we already had that pattern of an early bedtime. I mean, even now my kids are older and they're still have an earlier bedtime than majority of their peers, because they just need sleep. And I think that it's even more important, like you said, with the boots and bar, because if you're doing it early, that means you're capturing that 12-hour period earlier, right? A kid that goes to bed at 6 and wakes up at 6, you got 12 hours. Like, for me, it was like the math was easy. Whereas if she were going to bed at 8, I'm not going to be able to keep her in them until 8 a.m. in the morning. So that earlier bedtime actually helped in getting the required hours too. So what do you recommend, Bonnie, when people, like, during the repeated wake up? So let's say a child has been sleeping for a long period, like, got into a good sleep routine, like Denise said, and then all of a sudden you hit this point where they're not sleeping as well and they're waking up, and then you're like, is it the boots and bar? Like, is there things that you're supposed to check, or what do you recommend parents do in that scenario?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would check. You've got to, you know, do what you would do as a parent and check on your child and make sure they're okay. But ultimately, I think it's about, like I said, not introducing anything new to that sleep, you know, routine, and making sure that, you know, you're there to comfort them, but actually you're not there to put them back to sleep. So it may be that you know, with my first child was a terrible sleeper, and he did not have clubfoot, and so I used various methods with him in terms of helping him to reach that skill of sleep, and I definitely adapted it to when I had my second son and he started not sleeping so well because of the boots and bars. I didn't want him to be falling out of the bed. I was always very concerned of him falling out of his little cot bed, thinking that he was wearing some sort of anchor on him and that he would just literally flop out. So I adapted the methods I used for him, but the whole time I sort of remained with him without helping him fall asleep, just so that he knew I was there. Also, I was there to make sure he didn't fall out of bed, but I didn't do anything else. And it really was a case of allowing him to work out for himself how to put himself back to sleep. So I would say sort of less is more on that in that case, and trying not to do too much to, apart from, you know, checking they're well and checking they're comfortable, and therefore allowing them to develop those skills and practice them for themselves.
Mm-hmm. It's a common concern, actually, that people about children falling out of bed with the boots and bar. I don't think they're really at more risk of falling out of bed with the boots and bar than they are without the boots and bar, really. And the other really big concern, which maybe you two can both comment on this, is toileting. So there's big always questions about what are we going to do when our child starts toileting. So again, I think when they do it, they're ready to do it. And not many children wake up, take themselves to the toilet, go back to bed and put themselves back to sleep. Most children wake up and shout for their parents if they need the toilet, or they don't wake up once they've got to the stage where they're going dry through the night. So, but I mean, maybe your experience is different, but I think that children with boots and bar will find a way of getting to the toilet if they need to. But
Yeah.
they tend to shout for their parents anyway.
Yeah, I think as well, if you're limiting slightly the amount of fluid that they're having after a certain time, and they've been to the toilet before they go to bed. I mean, all three of my children have never really woken me up to go to the toilet, I have to say, once they've got to that stage. And so, yeah, I think that's a worry, but it should be something, yeah, that, you know, we can hopefully feel quite confident. There's methods of dealing with that, and that, so that they don't really wake in the night, and they should be able to sleep all through the night and not leave the toilet. And the other thing with the falling out of bed, I mean, I was always worried about that, but again, there's ways around it. You know, I would know a top tip would be to keep them in the cot as long as possible. So, you know, keep that child in the cot as long as possible, yeah, till 3.5. You know, really, it's a much safer place for them to be with the boots and bars. You don't want that worry of them falling out of the bed or getting up in the night or trying to move around the, you know, the floor and things like that. You just don't need that worry. If they get into a really good habit of sleeping in that cot, then just leave them in it. You're going to have to pick them up anyway to take the boots and bars off. You know, if they're happy in it, I would keep that as their safe space and keep them in the cot. And then when I moved my son out into a cot bed, I did have one of those sides on it, which came down and came up. And again, it just puts your mind at rest. You've got to find ways of putting your mind at rest with all of these things that, you know, thrown at us, to ensure that we can just focus on that really sort of deep sleep and encouraging sleep without any wake ups and without any of your mind going to overdrive about different problems or different things that could be happening, to your daughter or to your son.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think that we kept all of our kids in their cots or cribs until as long as possible. And I think that was just because that was part of their sleep routine and that was their comfort and it was easy. It put my mind at ease. And like you said, Bonnie, I think one of the things that it is loud. I was worried about when she rammed into the crib bars that was going to wake her up. But the reality is it didn't really wake her up. It more just was startling for us through the monitor that we're listening on, right? And one of the things that we did, you said you put on kind of towels, like sort of protectant layers to prevent that. And we had her sleep in a sleep sack that covered it. So then it actually provided at least a little bit of buffer too. And I think we actually use her crib mattress still. I mean, she's almost 6. She doesn't even have boots and bar anymore, but now it's used to it. Is like we put her crib mattress up against the wall to protect the wall from when she was like, if she would roll into it, right? So there are different ways that you can make those adjustments for the boots and bar. But like you said, we need to keep the consistency of the actual routine of sleep so that we are developing that skills. And then as far as the toileting goes, I agree. I think it's once they're to that point, I know a lot of parents seem to get really like worried about it. Like, I don't know, because there's again, like all these different advice about how to toilet and when you should and how that works. And, and then trying to figure that out with this extra component of nighttime sleep. I always am like, if they're having frequent wake ups, like then keep them in a pull up for longer if you need to. Like we kept her in a pull up for longer because why wouldn't we? It's like it's a layer of stress. She's not going to wear a pull up forever. And sure enough, she's not, so it's that piece. But we also, if she had some sort of like, she really had an emergency or she was sick and needed to go to the bathroom, she would just call us in and we would carry her to the toilet and then wait for her and then come back and carry her back, right? Like it wasn't a huge lift, but I think parents think of it as a hurdle. But if you think of it just like in normal childhood development too, and the boots and bar might mean you have to carry them, but in reality, you'd probably be going to the toilet with your child anyways at that age. So it's just like a slightly different adjustment than what you would do in a normal situation.
Yeah, there were a couple of good things there, Bonnie, as well. I think things that I often get asked are about children getting cold at night, because when they roll over with the boots and bar, they take the covers with them, whether it's a duvet or blankets. And I think sleeping in a sleep bag is a good idea because it keeps the child warm. B, it sort of protects the cot bars a little bit, but it also means they can't get at the boots so readily. So it's about searching around for one that's wide enough to fit, isn't it, the boots and bar? But there are some on the market. And then the other thing you mentioned was about funny positions, and that's something that we often get asked about. I mean, the thing I say is children will move. If they're uncomfortable, they'll move. It's not, and I would love one day to have a poster of all the different positions children sleep in their boots and bar, because it is hysterically funny that some of them sleep in the most weird positions, but then as do all children sleep in strange positions. So it would be great to have some photos on Facebook sent in, I think, or something.
Yeah, that would be really fun to have just like a wall of all the different types of sleep positions with the boots and bar, because that does seem to be a common thread in the social media groups of like, my baby's sleeping like with her boots like up close to her face. Is that normal? And it's like,
resting on their head. I've had a baby that slept with the like forward onto the boots and bar on the bed and slept like that. And they could move. They could change positions. It's just where they decided to sleep.
And as they get older, and if they don't, obviously a sleep sack works very well when they're little. And I think, you can buy super long ones now, but I think as they get older, and if they're not the first sibling, if they've got, an older brother or sister, they might be like, why am I wearing this sleep sack now? My only other tip would be that, ditch the duvet, ditch any blank sheets or blankets, because it's just, again, something that you can worry about. They're going to get twisted in it. They're going to be cold. I always used to buy a onesie, and I would chop the bottom off, onesie that is quite warm, and you wouldn't really choose to sleep in it, but it would keep a child perfectly warm throughout the night. Their feet are warm because they've got socks on. So actually a onesie where it zips up and you just put them into the bed is a perfectly good option. They're not going to overheat if it's just a onesie and the room is cool. And then it just relaxes your mind to think they're warm. They can go in any position they like. And they're not going to wake up for that reason. So it gives another sort of thing, another tip really for when as they get a bit older.
Yeah, that's great. And as you say, I suppose if the duvet has fallen off, or your quilt's fallen off, or sheets or whatever, they can't pull them back themselves. So that's another time when they would call for you. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like a common theme here is simplicity is best, right? The less that you have involved in the routine and the less props, that sort of thing. Even blankets. Like I remember when we introduced blankets, it was like a whole nightmare because she was like, I want to be tucked in, and then she'd get untucked, and then she was expecting us to come back in and tuck her in. And I was like, yeah, no, we're done. We're not doing this anymore. Because you want them to have, there is that piece too of, as a parent, I wanted her to have like a normal, or what I thought of as a normal experience to her older sisters. So her older sisters started using blankets when they moved to a toddler bed. And so it was like, well, shouldn't we do that with her too? Because she's, um, but then it was like, but you also have to make that adjustment for each child and their temperament. That wasn't about her boots and bar. The blanket was an issue because of her temperament, because that's what her expectation was, right? So it's also being able to make those adjustments if you do have other siblings that you are, have that comparative piece to. Yeah, and I think for us, like as I said, simple was best as far as clothes went. Like we most of the time we did either a shirt with pants or a onesie with pants, because then if I had to do a diaper change in the middle of the night, it was easy to do. I didn't have to take the boots and bar off for any reason. If she had to use the toilet in the middle of the night, same sort of thing, right? It was an easy access. Our number one goal was, how do we keep her in her boots and bar so that we don't have to remove anything? um, we don't have to remove the boots and bar, and we still can have access to changing things as needed.
Actually, just coming back to something you mentioned earlier about swapping with your husband, it's a really nice idea actually, just to get grandparents, I think, people to practice putting them on in the day. So again, it takes away that terrible thought that you're never going to be able to go out again because nobody else can put the boots and bars on. So we used to just in the day, the baby's round, and get granny to just try putting them on, just so she feels confident, gives you the confidence to think, oh look, she can put them on, she's done it perfectly well. And we can go out at some point in our lives. 5 years is a long time to think, I'm the only one that can put my child to bed. So actually, that's a nice idea, just to get family members or friends. We had a babysitter that used to do it for us as well, just so that they're confident doing it. It takes away another thing that we can worry yourself about so much, because you think, oh, we'll never be able to go out and someone else can never put my child to bed. So that's another little tip, really.
Yeah, I like that. I think that especially if you start doing that earlier, and so that your child also can adjust to having somebody else put their boots and bar on. So it's not just like, oh, it's only mom and dad as they get older into those toddler and, um, very deformative years of like, this is how I want things to go. And I think if you are practicing that, and that's something that I wish we would have done. I didn't do it. And in hindsight, I wish that we would have done that earlier. So then we could move that. My confidence would have built so that I would feel more comfortable letting other people do that. Because there is a stress of like, when you're having somebody put it on new at night and you're like, this, my child's going to be in this for 12 hours. So if there's one thing that's off and that's going to cause a skin issue, like I don't want to do that, because I want to avoid that. But if we're practicing in a, low stakes setting, right? Like low risk, you're just like, let's just practice putting these on. So then you can help do it as not in. So when it comes to those times, you feel more comfortable with the people putting them on.
I mean, often when a baby's in a high chair, you can practice it then. We used to leave our son in the boots and bars over breakfast sometimes, because if you put them into a high chair, you've maybe got another half an hour or 45 minutes, if you didn't quite make the quota that night. So that's another tip. But I mean, yeah, even just in the middle of the day, like you said, just ask someone to put them on, and they get used to it more as well. They don't feel so worried about it as well, because it is quite a bit anxious. There's a bit of anxiety there from their point as well. Like Granny was a bit like, oh, I don't know what to do, and I was like, it's actually fine. Like when you show her and they practice and they're fine with it, then again it helps you to think it's not so bad, and they can be part of your bedtime routine.
Yeah, that's great, really good. I mean, one of my tips would be honest with your team that are managing helping you manage with the boots and bar, because there's no point going along to an appointment and saying everything's fine and you're wearing the boots, your baby's wearing the boots and bar and they're not. I mean, one, we probably know. It's quite easy to tell. And two, how are we going to help if we think everything's fine? And it just makes you feel more guilty then if I think for parents to come in and say, yeah, they're wearing the boots for 12 hours every night when they're maybe only wearing them for 4 or not maybe at all. We're not going to be able to help with that. So I think being honest with your team, you're not going to be judged. The team just want to help and make it happen. So it's lovely to have these tips from you and Bonnie, actually, as a professional, as well as I'm sure parents are going to find this really helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too, Denise, is that parents can feel very isolated in their treatment at home, and then they can feel like, well, I'm seeing my Clubfoot provider. She is not somebody she's not going to help me figure out how to get my child to sleep, but it's all together. Like, that's an important part of the treatment, is that maintenance phase and sleeping in the boots and bar. So if you're struggling with that, talk to your provider and hopefully they can help you identify or point you in directions of people that can help you figure that out and come up with solutions. I think a lot of the time we just struggle on our own thinking, well, this isn't really a medical issue, but it does pertain to that. So talk to your providers. There's one thing that I've learned is that they really do want to help. I haven't talked to one Clubfoot provider who hasn't been like, please come talk to me. If you have an issue, talk to me. If you have any sort of run into it, call me, text me. Like, there's majority of them are really in tune with it. And they really are like Denise and want to help you problem solve when you run into those solutions. And I mean, they'll even have options like Bonnie. Like, I remember I even wrote in my book that I was like, I never talked to a sleep consultant because I thought they're not going to understand, because my child has boots and bar and they're not going to get it. Right. So there are people that your team could even resource out to, like Bonnie, to go like, listen, this is somebody that can really help you, who has experience with Clubfoot and boots and bar and knows kind of the normal sleep pattern, is a sleep consultant. Like, there's those types of resources that you just, as a parent, don't know. And I thought I was real good at resource finding, but you don't know what you don't know. So being able to ask that, I think, is really important. What do you think, Bonnie? What's your kind of overall top tip for Clubfoot sleep?
Sleep. Get yourself the right socks.
Okay.
Now make sure their feet are comfy and cozy. Put the boots and bars on, and then develop a really good bedtime routine. Get them into bed early. I always say 7:30 is my key time, not later than that. If between 7 and 7:30, get them into bed so they're not getting overtired. And you will find that an overtired baby will wake up more anyway. So actually, an overtired baby has got lots of the stress hormone cortisol running through their bodies. They will constantly wake throughout the night because they're overtired. And so that, I would say, just making sure they're in bed at the right time. And really, I would say, just get rid of any sleep props that you're doing. And I know you're doing it out of, because you feel this love for your child and you want to help them sleep, but actually it's about encouraging their sleep skills. They've got to develop them independently. And I never ask a family to leave their baby alone to cry. I always say, like, if you want to stay with them, that's absolutely fine. I never ask you to just walk out the room and shut the door. And there are ways of encouraging your baby to sleep better and encouraging that skill. And just knowing that it's not the boots and bars that are waking them, and that you can do things to develop them into better sleepers.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you, Bonnie. I feel like such a great way to encapsulate everything that we've talked about. So I think we'll make sure that we have the information provided for Bonnie and her sleep consulting work. If you guys are interested in working with her, we'll make sure that that's a part of the link that is in this video to contact her. And I just appreciate Denise and Bonnie, you both being here. And I really think that this is something that is kind of a gap that we don't talk a lot about, because it's kind of a middle range. It's not really medical treatment, but it also really is important to the clubfoot treatment. So kind of bridging that gap, I think, is so important. And I'm very grateful for you guys being here today and making this happen.
Oh, thanks, Maureen.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you.